Picture this scene, Chris. It's a bustling city, the hustle and bustle of Wall Street in New York. Two top-level executives are engaged in intense negotiation, delving deep into sale of a massive tech firm. There's visible tension. Each word they spar is imbued with potential futures of their firms.
Ah, the fascinating world of negotiations, Olivia. It's like a chess match, isn't it? Each move calculated, with an eye always on the end game. Just like that scene, today's conversation is all about unraveling the threads of negotiation in business, but more importantly, how to effectively communicate in English in such intense situations.
Exactly, Chris. You see, in that setting we just imagined, the stakes are so high that every sentence, every phrase, every single word they use makes a difference. Their knowledge of English vocabulary and phrases, their understanding of themselves and their counterparts, their cultural IQ, all play critical roles in formulating their negotiation strategy.
Surely, and let's not forget the persuasive language part, Olivia. That's an art in itself. These execs need to be persuasive yet respectful, assertive but not offensive, direct without being blunt. There's a thin line to tread, and doing all of these while getting the job done in English. It's no small feat.
That's so true. And it's not just about knowing English. It's also about knowing the right kind of English, business English. And that brings us to our topic at hand. Over the course of our episode, we will delve into exactly these aspects and help our listeners master negotiation in business English.
Do you remember, Olivia, how we shared the tale of the Titanic negotiation between top tech firms? I believe it fundamentally involved two negotiation styles, competitive and collaborative. Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't competitive negotiation all about doing what's best for your interests, regardless of the other party?
That's a basic understanding, yes. The competitive or distributive style is more like a zero-sum game, where we perceive the negotiation as a pie to be divided. But in a collaborative or integrative style, it's more about expanding that pie, rather than dividing it. Here, both parties strive for a mutual gain. Each one discusses their needs and preferences openly, and works towards a solution that benefits both.
Exactly, Olivia. It's like deciding if you want to claim the largest piece of the pie, or make the pie bigger for everyone. But isn't it true that every negotiation requires preparation, irrespective of its style?
You're on point, Chris. Preparation is the key. You need to know your BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. It's like your safety net. If a deal falls through, you should know what other options you have on the table. You see, BATNA gives you a certain level of power during negotiations.
I've always seen BATNA as my trump card during funding rounds. My negotiations improved considerably once I started identifying my BATNA beforehand. And knowing when to walk away? It's as much important as knowing when to push for more. But Olivia, negotiating isn't just about BATNAs and styles, right? There are some tactical aspects, like phrases and their uses.
Absolutely, Chris. Having a few key phrases handy can be a real game changer. For instance, you can use "just to clarify," or "can we explore other possibilities," to navigate the conversation to your advantage. Similarly, phrases like, "could we consider this?" or "what if I propose?" can help you assert your ideas without overpowering the other.
I see. A certain way of phrasing can lead the conversation towards a more profitable outcome. You're never just exchanging words in a negotiation. You're sculpting the outcome with each phrase. You see, Olivia, power dynamics indeed play a crucial role in setting the stakes during a negotiation. It's important to remember that power doesn't always reside where we think it does.
Very true. Can you clarify what you mean by that, Chris?
Yeah. So, power isn't just about status or hierarchy. Sometimes power can be drawn from knowledge, influence, connections, or even traits like charisma and confidence.
And I guess understanding these dynamics can help set the stakes better.
Exactly. Knowing who holds the power and how they use it can greatly influence your approach and strategy. By this, you are also likely determining what you're willing to accept and what you'll fight for.
Speaking of which, let me demonstrate something interesting. Bear with me. Chris, I'm going to role-play a negotiation scenario, and I want you to focus on my body language.
That's an interesting way to illustrate. Carry on.
So, as you can see in this scenario, by maintaining an open posture, leaning in slightly, using hand gestures for emphasis, and maintaining eye contact, I'm displaying my engagement and interest in the conversation.
You're non-verbally communicating your confidence and giving off win-win vibes, which is equally important to the words being spoken.
Right. Your body language can either reinforce your point or negate it. Conveying the wrong message could create a defensive environment which isn't favorable for negotiation.
So the realization here is, both power dynamics and body language, if paid attention to, can significantly impact the course of negotiation.
Chris, let's role-play a negotiation scenario now. You're the tech startup founder, and I'm representing an interested investor. How would you start this negotiation?
Well, Olivia, to start with, it's crucial to build rapport. So as the startup founder, I would kick off with a friendly conversation, subtly setting up the agenda and painting a vivid picture of what my startup can potentially offer and deliver. I'd conference with, Olivia, it's been great to connect with you. Our startup, at the core, is about leveraging cutting-edge technology, which can create a significant impact in the market. It's not just a business, it's a revolution waiting to happen.
Absolutely, Chris. Establishing that connection lays the groundwork for a successful negotiation. And as the investor, I'd respond with, "Thank you, Chris. That does sound promising. Investment decisions, as you are aware, are based on numbers and facts. Could you delve deeper into your startup's performance metrics and growth opportunities?"
I see, Olivia, and as a response, I might say, "Sure, I understand your concerns. Our startup has already acquired substantial user base with a promising retention ratio. Our revenues have shown a consistent upward trend. We are expecting to expand into emerging markets, thus presenting more growth opportunities."
That's great. And in response, I would likely say, "It sounds like you've made impressive strides, Chris. However, my team and I would need time to dive into these figures. Let's reinforce this discussion after a comprehensive evaluation of the data you've mentioned." All right, rolling back. What did we learn here?
I think the key here is understanding the importance of creating a win-win outlook, starting on positive notes, establishing credibility, asserting your position, and maneuvering the conversation towards your agenda without appearing forceful. Moreover, persuasive language is key in driving your point across. What's your take, Olivia?
Well said, Chris. I'd like to add that active listening is just as essential in negotiations. By doing so, we show respect for the other person's ideas and opinions, which leads to a more open and productive communication environment.
Olivia, you mentioned the importance of reaching a win-win situation. Mind explaining more on securing a positive end in different business scenarios?
Sure, Chris. In a negotiation, remember, both parties are striving to get a deal that benefits them. So, naturally, it's a balance of give and take. To wrap up any negotiation positively, you have to understand the other party's fundamental interests and their deal breakers.
Can you provide a practical example for our listeners?
Of course. Let's say you are negotiating a price with a supplier. You want a lower rate while the supplier wants to maintain their profit. A positive ending here would involve brainstorming solutions to cut costs elsewhere, so the supplier can afford to give you a discount while still making an acceptable profit.
So it's about finding a mutual benefit, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. And it's crucial to express that in your closing statements. Demonstrate that you've really understood their position and show that you're aiming for a solution that benefits both parties.
Avoiding a win-lose situation, in other words, isn't it?
Right. And remember, conflicts often stem from misunderstood goals. If we can establish that we all want essentially the same thing, a successful deal, we can dispel a lot of potential conflicts right from the start.
I believe these insights will be immensely beneficial for those aspiring to negotiate successfully. After all, negotiating can be nerve-wracking, and knowing how to close on a positive note is surely a relief.
In 2019, Apple and Qualcomm had a public falling out over patent licensing fees. Do you remember that, Chris?
Yeah, I do. It was a heated topic in the tech world. Took them years to reach a settlement.
Exactly. Now Apple, as we all know, is a giant tech company, and Qualcomm, though not as known, is a key player in the chip market. The dispute was over the amount Apple was supposed to pay Qualcomm for using its chips in iPhones.
If I recall correctly, Apple was basically accusing Qualcomm of overcharging them for the chips.
Yes, and Qualcomm responded by saying that the fee wasn't just for the chips, but also for the technology within the chips, which was their intellectual property.
So essentially, it was a question of value perception. Both parties had different opinions on what the chips and the technology within them was worth.
That's a great observation, Chris. The whole dispute can be boiled down to a mismatch in perceived values, which is a common pitfall in any negotiation, really.
Absolutely. And it's not just about business deals. It can spill over into diplomatic and political negotiations as well.
To navigate these mismatches successfully, one needs an understanding of the counterpart's point of view, empathy, and strategic communication. There is always a way to find a middle ground and build a win-win strategy.
And that's what they eventually did, right? Apple and Qualcomm settled for an undisclosed amount and signed a 6-year global patent licensing agreement. It was a tough battle that required a lot of negotiation and compromise from both sides.
Negotiate like your future depends on it. This statement by one of our listeners, David, truly encapsulates the essence of negotiation. David works as a procurement executive and often has to negotiate with suppliers.
That sounds quite challenging. Olivia, I wonder how David manages these discussions while considering the pressure of securing the best possible terms for his company.
Well, David attributes his success mainly to the meticulous preparation he undertakes before every negotiation. He outlines his objectives clearly, nuances of the market, and his counterpart's potential motivations and pressures.
I must say, preparation is indeed crucial in negotiations. Leveraging this knowledge allows one to strategize and steer the negotiations towards a mutually beneficial outcome, as we saw in Apple and Qualcomm's case.
Right. It's a mind game. Let's not forget the significance of active listening. Another listener, Rachel, a freelance brand consultant, recalled how she came to an agreement with a potential client who'd initially lowballed her.
This should be interesting. How did Rachel succeed in that challenging situation?
She first listened to the client's concerns and respected their perspective. By addressing each concern with empathy and simultaneously communicating the value she'll bring to the table, they eventually reached a compromise. She confesses that neglecting active listening and only focusing on asserting her viewpoint could have cost her that deal.
Negotiation in English doesn't just involve the application of tactical phrases. As we can see from Rachel's story, handling negotiations is also to gauge and respond effectively to the counterpart's spoken and unspoken sentiments. Can you share more such strategies, Olivia?
Certainly, Chris. Understanding cultural nuances is another valuable negotiation skill. Different cultures may have distinct negotiation styles. Some might prefer direct communication, while others appreciate subtlety. Awareness of these cultural sensitivities can be a catalyst for smoothing potential friction and bridging the gap between different perspectives. No deal is better than a bad deal. How many times have we heard this, Chris? And how often do we underestimate its implications? This statement talks about the BATNA, or best alternative to a negotiated agreement. It's the course of action that will be taken by a party engaged in negotiations if the current discussions fail and an agreement cannot be reached.
That's an interesting concept, Olivia. In essence, it means having a plan B ready if plan A doesn't work out.
Exactly. Having a BATNA increases negotiating power. If you are not afraid to walk away, you're not as desperate to make a deal at any cost.
That's a valuable insight there. It's not just about striking a deal, but doing it on the best possible terms. What other terms or phrases are common in negotiation parlance, Olivia?
Win-win is another key term in negotiation. It refers to scenarios where both parties feel they have gained something positive. There's also concession, which is the act of yielding to another's proposal, usually to keep the negotiations moving and to find a compromise.
Let's not forget about the persuasive language that acts as the backbone of these negotiations. It's not enough to merely know how to present your points. it's equally important to do it persuasively. A key strategy here would be framing the negotiation in a way where it's more about problem-solving than winning or losing.
That's true, Chris. It's not just about the language, but also the presentation and the attitude. Anticipate objections and be prepared to counter them. You can also use silence to prompt counterparts to talk or reveal information.
Silence, a powerful tool indeed. It allows your negotiation partner to ponder over your points while giving you the opportunity to read their reaction. Negotiations really are a fine blend of strategy, eloquence, and patience.
Definitely. And remember, in negotiations, language is more than words. Be aware of nonverbal cues and body language as they can often negate the strongest arguments. It's a fascinating area, Chris. So many layers.
I couldn't agree more, Olivia. The art of negotiation involves so much more than what meets the eye.
Hardball. Now that's a term that refers to an aggressive and forceful approach to negotiations. Typically, it involves pushing your counterpart to agree to your terms, often applying pressure tactics such as refusing to budge on your position or making high-stakes demands. It's a word that has its roots in American baseball, illustrating the competitive nature of the negotiation process.
So just like in baseball, you need to anticipate the pitcher's move and plan your swing accordingly. In a way that's similar to deadlock, another term that's frequently used in negotiation parlance. Deadlock refers to a situation where communication has failed and agreement seems impossible.
Yep, exactly, Chris. And in such cases, one strategy that's often used to navigate the deadlock is implementing a stalemate breaker. That's another term worth noting. It refers to an action or a decision that's designed to change the existing course of negotiation. It could be as simple as taking a break or bringing in a neutral mediator to facilitate the conversation.
Interesting. Negotiation does sound like a complex strategical game rather than a simple dialogue. So, Olivia, as the discussion progresses towards the end, what strategies can be implemented to close a negotiation effectively?
Great question, Chris. One way is to summarize the points that have been agreed upon throughout the conversation, also known as capturing the agreement. This helps in clarifying any misconceptions and solidifying the agreement. However, the most crucial aspect here is the final contract. It's the documented agreement on all the terms and conditions discussed during the negotiation.
Right. Sounds like in the end it all boils down to how well you can execute these tactics and utilize the necessary lingo. Lots of useful vocabulary and insights here, Olivia. Certainly opens the door to a whole new understanding of negotiation. Olivia, we've covered strategies, vocabulary, and all the tactical elements of negotiation, but we're yet to discuss one important variable that plays into all these factors: culture. Different cultures approach negotiation differently, don't they?
Absolutely, Chris. In fact, the success of a negotiation might as well depend on how well you understand and navigate cultural nuances. Essentially, cultures can be broadly split into low context or high context.
Low context and high context cultures, what are those?
High context cultures such as Japan, China, and many Middle Eastern countries place a higher emphasis on nonverbal cues and the whole context of the conversation during a negotiation. So, they might not be as direct and to the point as some might expect.
Then low context cultures would be?
Correct. Countries like the US, Germany, and the Nordic countries fall under low context cultures. Here, negotiators often expect a clear, logical flow of information, without the need for reading between the lines. They value straight talk and clear individual points.
I guess then, culture and negotiations do go hand in hand. There's also the aspect of individualistic and collectivist cultures, right?
Yes, in individualistic societies such as the US, UK, or Australia, negotiators focus on individual goals and rights. While in more collectivist societies like Japan or Korea, the focus would be more on harmony, consensus, and group benefits.
Makes sense. And understanding these differences might help avoid misunderstandings during negotiations. And do you remember, Olivia, the classic story of American Motors and the Japanese?
Oh, Chris, how could I forget? The misunderstanding was almost comical.
Yes, they were negotiating a joint auto-manufacturing venture, and the interpretation of silence led to a massive miscommunication. The story goes that when the Americans presented their proposal, the Japanese didn't say anything.
Right. The Americans took the silence as agreement, while in Japanese culture, silence is often a sign of disagreement or a request for more time to consider the proposal.
Exactly, and the entire deal fell apart because of this simple cultural misunderstanding.
Which brings us to this key point. To navigate international negotiations successfully, it's crucial to read up on the cultural subtleties you might encounter. And be flexible.
Right. Adapting your approach can be a game changer. And this doesn't mean you have to entirely change your negotiation style, but being aware of and respectful to cultural differences will help.
If you're unsure, asking clarifying questions can prevent misunderstandings. Don't hesitate to confirm if you got the point correctly. Better to ask than make assumptions.
And don't forget to also consider tone and body language. In some cultures, hand gestures or direct eye contact may be perceived differently.
Or how about punctuality? In some cultures, being on time for a meeting is vital, while in others it's acceptable and even a norm to be a few minutes late.
Entire books can be written on this topic, but the most important takeaway is this. Be aware of these nuances, adapt, be respectful, and when in doubt, ask. Olivia, I've been thinking about how crucial listening is during negotiations.
Yes, Chris. Negotiating is not just about putting across our points, but also about understanding what the other party is conveying. And that's where active listening comes into play. Can you throw light on that from your experiences?
Absolutely. During some of our initial funding rounds at Neural Nest, I noticed that whilst we presented our killer ideas, flashy graphs and statistics, the actual negotiations moved forward when we started actively listening to what our investors had to say.
That makes sense. It's not about just hearing, but understanding and absorbing the message. And that can make all the difference in a negotiation, wouldn't you agree?
True, you nailed it, Olivia. One has to consider the spoken as well as unspoken cues. An overlooked part of active listening is the ability to leverage silence strategically. Silence gives the other party an opportunity to express their views, potentially revealing vital information.
Interesting viewpoint, Chris. I believe there are some techniques to enhance our listening skills, right?
Absolutely, Olivia. Paraphrasing, for instance, is a useful technique. If you can summarize what's been discussed, it helps assure the other person that their point has been understood. This not only creates a sense of validation, but also helps clarify any miscommunications.
That's an excellent approach, Chris. Active listening allows us to extract crucial points from the conversation, enabling us to tailor responses that align with the counterpart's perspective. It essentially facilitates a win-win situation.
Exactly. As negotiators, it's imperative we practice active listening to ensure that we build healthy and productive relationships, which will, in turn, lead to more fruitful negotiations.
How about we take this a notch higher and do a role play to demonstrate the power of active listening in negotiations?
That's a fantastic idea, Olivia. So who's the client and who's the investor?
I'll be the startup founder looking for investments. You, Chris, will be a potential investor. All set?
Sounds good to me. Let's see how this negotiation unfolds.
Our startup is revolutionizing the AI tech scene. We've developed a unique machine learning algorithm that is set to change the way businesses operate. We need your organization's support to take this forward.
So, Olivia, it sounds like you've made some exciting tech advancements. But how do you see these changes impacting business operations? And what financial projections do you have for the business?
Absolutely, Chris. We see our technology empowering businesses to make informed decisions, reducing operational costs, and boosting productivity. As per our conservative financial projections, we expect profitability within 2 years of product launch. However, we need strong partners like you to make this happen.
Thanks for expanding on that, Olivia. It seems like you've got a clear strategic direction for your business, but can you provide more clarity on why you chose us as potential investors?
Chris, we believe our vision aligns with your organization's mission, and that your expertise could provide unparalleled guidance in our journey.
That's an interesting perspective, Olivia. Our organization does focus on supporting innovative tech enterprises. Before we move any further, I would love to get an understanding of the potential risks involved.
As with any business, there are risks. A few we foresee include the adoption rate of the technology and competition. However, we believe our unique algorithm and proposed mitigation strategies can manage these risks effectively.
Thanks for being upfront about the potential challenges, Olivia. I appreciate your honesty and thoughtful risk management strategy. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground in our negotiation journey today, and now comes a crucial part, dealing with deadlocks. Deadlocks can be intimidating, but there are tactics you can use to overcome these stalemates in negotiations. One of the first suggestions I'd like to offer is reframe the conversation. Try to shift focus from areas of disagreement to finding common interests. Secondly, sometimes taking a break, like a recess of sorts, can diffuse tension and allow both parties to reflect and reassess.
Also, Chris, it's noteworthy how some negotiators employ hardball tactics. They throw you off balance, use psychological tricks, or tend to be too aggressive in their approach. One useful strategy when dealing with such people is to stay calm and not let their tactics ruffle you.
Definitely, Olivia. Responding assertively can be very effective here. Show you're firm and not afraid to push back, but do it in a respectful manner. Also, never hesitate to call out bad behavior. They need to know you're not just going to roll over.
You've got a point, Chris. But the trick is differentiating between hardball tactics and merely aggressive negotiation styles. Sometimes aggressive negotiators might just be passionate about the deal.
True. It's crucial to distinguish the fine line there. Aggression doesn't necessarily mean the negotiator is a bully. Ultimately, it's about understanding their motivations and finding a path to mutual agreement.
And let's not forget the variety of personalities we might encounter. Each requires a different strategy. While you might match pace with assertive negotiators, dealing with an avoidant or competitive negotiator might need a softer touch. Understanding your counterpart's personality can give you a strategic advantage. What an incredible journey we've had today, exploring the art of negotiation. Remember, as Chris emphasized, preparation and understanding the power dynamics cannot be overstressed. Besides, understanding your counterpart's personality can give us that strategic edge.
And let's not overlook the importance of active listening as we've discussed. It's where we can find those gaps to bridge and turn the negotiation tides in our favor. Also, never underestimate the power of being alert to cultural nuances.
A valid point, Chris. Now, while wrapping up, let's revisit a quote we all probably know, but it couldn't be more relevant today. The art of communication is the language of leadership. James Humes.
Indeed, the single most powerful tool you have is your attitude. Zig Ziglar. It's a gentle reminder. In negotiation, more than the words, it's the attitude, the resilience, the understanding that ultimately leads to success.
Well said, Chris. And now, as we wrap things up, we wouldn't want to miss the chance to highlight some key insights from our listener interactions. Let's see. One of our listeners, Jim, shared how he used the sandwiching criticism technique, and to his surprise, he saw the negotiations taking a positive turn.
That's great to hear. Our listener Samantha mentioned she actually faced a deadlock and applied the reframing the conversation strategy. It changed the entire negotiation dynamics, and they found a common ground.
We're glad that our discussions are arming you with the tools to better your skills. Moving towards our next episode, get ready as we dive into presentation skills in English. Impress with impact. We'll be sharing invaluable tips, discussing strategies to deal with public speaking anxiety, and polishing up your English to present with confidence.
Absolutely. Prepare for discussions on how to engage your audience, how to structure presentations for success, and so much more. Until then, keep practicing, and remember, it's not about perfection, it's about progress. See you in the next session.